Let's say that you just added an LLM to your app, maybe through using OpenAI API. And then you asked it something like, give me the full information for a customer with ID. Or let's email this customer their latest invoice. Or let's call this API and get the latest orders. Do you think it will know how to do so? No. And that's because it doesn't have tools. So in this video, I'm going to explain what tools are and how you can add them to your app. But before so, let's see the limits of an LLM. So there are things that LLM can do on their own. For example, it doesn't know about recent events because of the knowledge cutoff. It also can't see your private data or anything internal like database. Also, it doesn't know how to take actions. For example, sending an email or updating a record. And here where tools come in. So first, let's define what a tool is. The tool is just a simple function that you have in your code. But the key concept here is that the LLM does not know how to call that function. You call it for the LLM and you give it the answer. Yes, this might sound a little bit weird, but let me explain that. So the idea is that once you have the function, you can describe it to the model and tell it, I have a function of this name and it has these parameters. And then whenever the LLM wants to call that function, it just tells you so. For example, I need to call this function and please call it and give me the answer. This will be clear once we get to the code. But before we go to the code, I want to mention something quick. So there is good convenient ways that the provider SDK can give us to call tools. But in order to understand what's happening behind the scenes, let's do the manual way, which is how we can create tools from scratch, but then I'm going to show you how to do that with the LLM provider SDK. So the manual way is as simple as giving the system prompt a description about the tools you have. For example, you have this function called this, and you can just call it by telling me to call this function. And then once we get the response and we see that it's asking us to call the function, then we call it and then we send the result back. So let me show you that in the code. In this example, I'm just using the OpenAI SDK and I'm creating this client. But of course, you can use any other LLM provider, but each will have a different kind of schema and format to follow, but the concepts will remain the same. So here I'm defining a list of tools I want to support, and they are just functions. I'm putting them in an object here just to make it easy to access them, but of course you can define them however you want. So the first one is called get customer by ID. It accepts a parameter, customer ID, then that hard codes the way we look for the customers. For example, if the customer ID is this, then return this object. Otherwise, tell it we don't have this customer. Of course, in real-world scenarios, you will have some access to a database or an API or however your app is. And the second tool is send email, which just takes the email and it sends it by just saying it sent true. This is just an always successful kind of tool, but of course, it will have more things in real-world applications. And then we are calling the LLM by using the completion API. We're using this model and we are sending this messages array, and it just says that get me customer with ID this, and then we are getting the response. We are then pushing it to the messages array. If you don't know why we are doing so, you can check my other video which explains what does it mean for an LLM to be stateless and how we can give it memory. I'm going to put that in the description in this video, and then we are logging the result. Let's call it. So you can see that it just tells you, I can do this, but I need access to your customer data, maybe through a database or something. So it clearly doesn't have the tools in order to call this. Now let's support tools. And as I said, the simplest way to do it, which is not the way we do it usually, which is to tell the LLM about it. And the best way to do so is in the system prompt. So let me paste that. So you can see in the system prompt, we are just describing it that we have two tools. This is the first one. It takes these parameters. This is the second one. It takes these parameters. Then this is the important thing. So I tell it, in order to use a tool, reply with only JSON and nothing else. And the format should be tool, which gives us the tool name, and args, which gives us the args that it wants to use for the function. So now, if we call this LLM, we will get something different. Let's try. So now you can see it only responds with JSON. For example, the tool it wants to call called get customer by ID, and the args are this ID. So that's good. So what we can do next is just parse this as object from JSON and then call the function and then return the result. Let's do that. First, let's get the call, as we said, just parsing the JSON. And then the way I'm going to do it is just to check call.tool. Because if you remember, the schema we are getting back is this tool field. So if it exists, then that means it wants to call a tool. Otherwise, don't call a tool. But of course, this is not a clean way to do it, because what if the JSON is not valid, then it will error. But this is just for explanation purposes. Now let's just get the fields out of it. So I'm going to get the function name, which is accessing the tool field, and args from the args, and let's log them. And next we want to call the function. And now we have the function name and we have the args. All we have to do is just to check the function name and then call the corresponding function and put it in the results. Here's how. So you can see we have results variable. We are checking if the function name this, then call that guest customer by ID, passing the args, and put it in result. But for the other cases, we are going to do the same and then console log the results. The next thing we want to do is to tell the LLM about the result. And the way to do so is just by pushing this to messages, because this is the second message we're going to pass when we are going to call the LLM the second time. So the role is user because we are providing it with the values, and the content is we are explicitly telling it that the tool result is this result that we got here. And now, since we have all the messages in the messages array, all we have to do is do the second call. We need to do the second call because in this call, the LLM will get the answer of the previous tool call, and then it will give us the final result. So in this case, the second call is just the same thing. We're passing the messages array, and then we are logging it. Now let's test that. So you can see that the first call, it returns this message where it gives us the JSON. Then we parse it to get the function name. Then we get the args, and then we call the function, and the result is stored in result variable, and that's the correct one. And then the second call, it just gives us the final answer, which it says, customer, this is John Doe with email. So you can see it now access the database or anything you wanted to access through tools. But as I described, this is not the usual way we do it. This is the manual way, which is just for demonstration purposes. The best way to do it is to use whatever the provider SDK is giving us. So let me explain that. For each LLM provider, they have their own SDK and they give you the way you can pass tools to it so it can use it. In this case, I'm using OpenAI. Anthropic has similar thing. It's just a different format. But the idea is that you define a schema for the tools, and it has a specific format. You just need to check the docs. For example, in OpenAI, it just says type function. The function is, this is the name of the function and the parameters it accepts. That's it. Now, when you call the LLM, you just need to provide it the tool schema and it will know how to use them. But there's also a great benefit of using the provider SDK that we don't have in the manual way, which is for every call that it asks us, for example, to call a tool, it gets us some ID that we associate with the tool call. So let me explain what that means. So let's say that the LLM wants to call two tools. The first one is get customer. The second one is send email. It asks us to call multiple tools in one pass, but how would it know which result we are returning for which tool? And that's why it returns some kind of a tool call ID. In this case, the first one is call_1. The second one is call_2. So that means for this first tool call, we have this ID. And when you want to give me the result, just tell me that this result is for this tool call ID. And the same thing for the other one. This way, it can distinguish between multiple tool calls and the results you are providing it back. So now let's go back to the code and see how we can use the provider SDK. So we're going to keep tools here, of course, because these are the functions that we want to call. The new thing we are going to add is the tool schema. As I said, it's just a way that OpenAI understands what tools are and how they can call them. And you can see, for example, we have the name of the function, we have the description, which is important. This is the way that you can teach the LLM that we have this tool and what this tool does. For example, this tool look up a customer by ID and return the customer's ID, name, and email. So when you tell it so, then it knows that if I want to look up a customer, I have to call this tool. The second tool is the send email, which is also a simple one. And you can see in the properties, we can pass the parameters we have. For example, we tell it there's an email parameter and it's required. Now, how can we pass these tools or tool schemas into the LLM? As simple as going to the call that we do here in the completions API. And now we only just send the model and the messages, we also need to send the tools. So it's just a tools field with tool schemas. And since we tell it that through this field, now we no longer need the system prompt, so we can just delete this. And if you remember here, the way we can see what tool it wants to call is from the message we got. But now we don't have to parse the message because the tools it requires us to call are part of the first message, not the content of it. So it's just the message has a field that it tells us we want to call a tool. So we no longer need to parse the content of the message because in the message, which is the response actually we are getting from the LLM, we can access this by saying first message, which is the response, and then we are going to say tool calls. And notice how it says calls, not call, because as I described earlier, we can call multiple tools. But in this example, I'm going to keep things simple and only call for the first tool. In order to do so, I'm going to get the first tool call by saying call, and let's just get the first one. Now, the other things will almost remain the same, but we have to adjust the fields. For example, now the first call, we have to say function and the name. And for the args, also function and arguments. But now this args is going to be a string, so we have to parse it to be an object. So let's say JSON parse. And then we keep the rest the same here for the result. So we call the same thing because we have the function name, we can call the function. But now the important part here to adjust is the way we tell the LLM about the result. So you can see previously we did it by setting the role to user. But actually, OpenAI gives us a better way to tell it that this is a result for a tool call. Instead of just saying user, we're going to say tool. And if you remember, we can tell it which tool we are returning the result for. And that's by providing the tool call ID. And this is going to be the call.id. So you can see we got the call from the array, the first one. We got the function name, the args, and we can also get the ID of that. And for the tool result, we don't have to do this. We can simplify this by just saying, let's return the result we got here, but first we need to stringify it. And that's it. So you can see the main difference is that instead of telling it that we need to send it as a user, the role is tool. Also, we provide the tool call ID, so it knows which result for which tool call, because we can have multiple tool calls. And then the way we access it is through the response from the LLM, through tool calls array, and the rest will be the same. Now let's try this. So you can see now, for the first response, we are getting this message where it knows that it wants to call a tool by this tool calls array that we just got the first one from. And then we got the function name. This is the function name. This is the args. This is the result after calling the function. And this is the second LLM call where it says, this is the customer ID, name, and email, which means everything works as expected. Now, let's just test another thing. So now we are using an existing customer ID. Now let's try if we just go here and say, give me for this one. So we know that from the function call, it should just give us an error because we're only supporting the first one. So let's save and run. And you can see that the result says customer not found, which means it's working. And the second LLM call gives you a better message. Now let's test another thing, which is sending an email. So I'm going to update this message to say, send an email to this email and say hi. So let's see if it can use the other tool. And you can see now the tool call is for a different function, which is send email. This is the arguments, and this is the result, which we return send true, which means that the LLM is going to say done, I sent the email because it works. So that's basically it. LLM tools are nothing but functions that the LLM asks you to call it. So I hope you found this useful, and I'll see you in the next video. Thanks for watching.